Hello and welcome to the Sleep Like a Baby podcast. If you're new here, I'm Hannah. I'm an infant sleep consultant as well as a mum living and working in South East London, and I cover all things sleep and parenting from a holistic, responsive and modern viewpoint. So if you're looking for someone who's going to be honest with you about normal infant sleep and toddler sleep, and is not going to tell you that the answer is just to put your baby down, drowsy but awake, leave them to cry it out, and follow a generic routine, you're in the right place. Welcome. And you know what? If that more traditional sleep training approach suits you, you're also very welcome here as well. This is a podcast for everyone. And in fact, today's subject really is covering something super, super universal, and that is maternal identity, perfectionism, self-criticism, and just how hard we as mothers can be on ourselves. This is not the first time I've covered this sort of subject. In fact, it's something that comes up in nearly every episode that I've done of this podcast. That sort of, high standards that we can, all of us, put on ourselves. Where does that come from, and how can we move through that so that we can give ourselves grace and kindness and forgiveness and all of those gifts that we as mothers really do deserve? Sleep in particular, though, can be something that we use as a measuring stick to judge how good a job we're doing. Not for everyone, but certainly I know lots of people, and I've been in this place myself, where I thought if I could get my child sleeping how I feel like society wants them to, then I am going to be a good mother. You know, if I can get them into a routine, if I can get them sleeping through the night, if I can break some of those so-called negative sleep associations, if I don't become a sleep crutch, if I read the books and do everything perfectly, then I will be a good mother. Sleep also gave me a sense of control, or made me think I had a bigger sense of control. So if I could get my child down to sleep at the times that the generic schedule that I'd been given said so, then that was good. I was good. I was in control. But the problem with children and other human beings in general is that they are their own people and they are not robots, and we can't just program them to do exactly what a piece of paper says that they should do when it comes to anything like sleeping, eating, toileting, behaviour. We are talking about an ever-evolving relationship with another human being here, rather than programming a robot or training a puppy. So there was this sort of misunderstanding, I suppose, of what I thought control was. And, becoming a parent is often an experience of lack of control and lack of, or a huge change to your identity. And therefore, if you're someone who is really craving that control again, or that sense of sort of knowing what you're doing, kind of becoming more fixated on how to control sleep can be a way that anxiety or that identity crisis can play out. So who better to talk to about all of this than a psychotherapist? And my guest today is the amazing Catherine Counihan, who you may already know from her brilliant Instagram account, which I've linked in the show notes. She's at Cath Counihan, and I've also linked to Cath's website as well, so you can find out more about her. Cath is an integrative psychotherapist, so she works in private practice in London, and she specialises in complex trauma, perfectionism, nervous system healing, shifting dysfunctional patterns in our families, and reparenting. And one of her areas of expertise is how our own childhoods impact on our parenting journey. So her passion is to shift shame and help each of her clients gain an embodied sense of being good enough. And that was a highlight of this conversation for me, actually, was talking about what does that good enough really mean. We hear it a lot in terms of motherhood and parenting advice, but it was really interesting and fascinating to dig a bit deeper into that whole concept. And Cath also has her own fantastic podcast, which is called Grow Yourself Up. And I was very, very flattered and privileged to be invited onto that show earlier this year. And we had such an amazing conversation. And I felt like I was talking to someone I'd known for years and years, that I just desperately wanted to have another chat with her and bring her onto my podcast. So very grateful that she said yes. So let's get cracking. And here she is. Here is Catherine Counihan. The Sleep Like a Baby podcast is supported by The Octopus Club, the online marketplace where you can buy, sell and give away baby and kids stuff without any hassle. If your home is piling up with toys, clothes and bits of kit that your little one no longer uses, The Octopus Club offers an easy, environmentally friendly way of selling or donating things to other families. And if you're on the hunt for high quality second-hand goods, this is the place for you. Honestly, the stuff on there is gorgeous. Check them out on Instagram or go straight to their website, theoctopusclub.com, to sign up today. Yeah. Okay, here we are. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Hannah. Really happy to be here with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I just love talking to you so much because you very kindly asked me to be on your podcast, which I loved, and it was such a treat. And so I've been looking forward to catching up again.
Oh, that's lovely. I know. I think that episode that we recorded where we both talked about our moms and how we got shut down, that was so. I'd never really talked about the memories that I shared with you, and it was so beautiful. I think that interchange.
No, yeah, it was really lovely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and so obviously today, you know, perfectionism is a subject that I think just comes up time and time again whenever we talk about motherhood. And I know we touched a little bit on that when we spoke last time, and you had some really lovely thoughts over email as well about how we can kind of continue that conversation. And I think, yeah, I feel like in every episode actually I've ever recorded this podcast, some element of perfectionism comes up in terms of our own expectations and how just the high standards that we as mothers often do hold ourselves to. And
yeah,
it's a lot, isn't it?
It's so much. I think it's just so much. And I think that I started off focusing really strongly in my sort of client population on adult daughters of alcoholics, actually, because they have often very perfectionism is a huge quality. But what I realized as I got further and further into my private practice was that every woman who came through my door was a perfectionist.
Yeah.
And I think that it can be, it like exists on a continuum, and we can be more or less perfectionist depending on what happened in our own family of origin. And if we didn't get our needs met for whatever reason, we're much more of a perfectionist. But because of the water we swim in and the speakers that blare to us that we're second-class citizens, women just learn that we have to get things absolutely right.
Yeah.
And so we just kind of learn that we're not good enough as we are, that we somehow constantly be going for these unrealistic expectations and holding ourselves to these ever-changing, like shifting goalposts, which is so unrealistic.
Yeah.
It's like so punishing.
It really is. Yeah. I have to say this week, so I was just telling you before we started recording that today is my son's birthday, and I feel like this is, for me, a season of massive perfectionism coming up, because it's really, I think whenever your child has a birthday, it makes you reflect, and you think about their birth, you think about what you were doing this day, however many years ago, you think about how far you've come, you think, I can't believe I have a whatever year old. How did he get here? Like, oh my goodness. And then there's also like the other levels of like, I guess there's a certain elements of performance as well of the birthday and the presents, cakes, parties. And for me anyway, that's where a lot of wanting it to be perfect in a very obvious way plays up. But I think it goes also to these other like very much deeper layers of of am I good enough, and am I putting, so it's just this little milestone that I kind of beat myself up over. I don't know. And yesterday was so fun. I was running around like a crazy woman, buying inflatable balloons and baking cupcakes, and you're
amazing.
Well, I don't know though, am I? Because is it necessary to do? I mean, obviously it's nice to make an effort, but I was like, but who am I doing this for? I guess obviously for my child, but also what if I didn't put such a high standard on the birthday, and what if actually I just spent time with him, got him some toys he liked, and relaxed a bit? I don't know.
I totally understand what you mean. And I think that it's really hard because that relaxing a bit and playing and just being with is the absolute antithesis of what many of us have been taught to just kind of do. And there's kind of that idea of, if I can create this perfect birthday party and all the friends seem like they're having a nice time, or the parents have a nice time, or whatever our hopes are, then things will be okay. I personally hate kids' birthday parties. I'm also having a birthday party for my twins this weekend, so I feel you. I ordered cakes just to the idea of baking. I was just like, I can't. Like, I just can't.
I mean, I hate baking. So there I was yesterday making like 24 cupcakes, thinking, what am I doing? I hate this. And it was 30 degrees in my flat, and I was putting the oven on, and
it was boiling, wasn't it?
And I was like, what am I doing? I could have just gone to the Morrison's and bought a box.
Yes, I know. And you can customize the icing. One of the best things is to customize the icing and put some sprinkles on or something.
Yeah, it's so silly.
But I think that this is something that we have to unhook from on an ongoing basis, and invite in more gentleness and ponder what it is that we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to get away from. Because I notice sometimes that I would feel more comfortable trying to perfect a piece of work, or even perfect an Instagram post, than I would sit on the floor and play something, because often play for me makes me feel a bit purposeless and like, what am I achieving? And then that links to lack of safety. So all of these things are so complex. There's like so many layers to soothing ourselves, so that we can move a bit away from the perfectionism into just being a bit more. It's like the most unsimple shift ever, I think.
Yeah. How do we do that? Step-by-step instructions, please.
I'm also still waiting for those, I'm such a perfectionist that if someone would just give me the steps of exactly how to do that, I would do that perfectly, and then at least I could feel peace at the end. But I think it's much messier than that in real life. I mean, I think that if we try and have a really serious answer to that question, all the perfectionism research shows that it's very much about how our needs were met as children, and how we were not seen in our full, authentic selves. And that happens for many reasons. Some of the most common things is that we don't have our negative affect held for us. So we get sent away. I think we talked about this, but we get sent away when we're having big feelings, or what is termed bad feelings, like when we're angry and raging, or bored, or just being how our parents don't like. And I mean, I think there's a lot of that with childhood. Like, children can be there's a lot of rage. They can be really grumpy sometimes, and really difficult. And it's hard to hold that. But it's really life-changing when we just model for the child, I'm still with you in all of that. Because I think many of us basically got the message, you're a pain in the neck when you're having those feelings, like, off you go. And so we really try and we treat ourselves like that, kind of like, I mean, basically we're trying to abandon ourselves. But so if we kind of go right back to that, the soothing ourselves and the being with ourselves, even when we're being a perfectionist, so sort of to notice, oh yeah, there's me doing that thing again that I do around birthdays, kind of bless me, like, dear little me is really trying so hard to make everything wonderful. And there is so much beauty, I think, in celebrating and in being present for our children around their birthdays. So, like, why not? And it can be done in a way that's really actually loving for ourselves and takes into account our own capacity.
Yeah, because I guess I was just thinking there's these two levels there, isn't there? Because it's like there's me trying to create this like sort of perfect birthday experience, and then there's me also then beating myself up for trying to create the perfect. But so it's just like two sticks I'm kind of attacking myself with.
Exactly.
Be a bit kinder to yourself.
Give ourselves some grace, because I think in some ways, like, I certainly have to thank perfectionism in my life for it's got me certain places. It's helped me do really well in certain areas. And it's just that it gets to be a bit much, because it's really actually self-attacking. And we really abandon ourselves in that process, because we often push ourselves way beyond like what we can even physically cope with, but we're so sort of disconnected from ourselves. and so that beating ourselves up is so familiar, like what you just said about the stick of like, oh, why am I doing this again? And I have found the easiest way to soften that is to catch it, because often we don't even catch it until much later or kind of notice. But in those moments, to have some humor with ourselves and to kind of, because it's hard when we're being a people pleaser as well, to kind of reflect on, this might be like not as good as I'm hoping. What will that actually mean? And in reality, I think particularly for children's parties, the kids just care about like playing a few games and maybe some music and some cake. And that's all they care about. But like, I often think, oh, I need all these balloons, or I need like super fancy cake, or I need, I mean, one of my twins, like I always try and get them presents that they'll like, but one of my twins is very, I don't know, she's got some stuff around, always wanting to have more stuff. She never seems sort of satisfied. And she said at her birthday this year, she was like, is that all? She actually said those words. And my other twin was much more like kind of gracious and happy with what she got. And I could go down a road of thinking, oh, you're such a brat, or oh, I'm a terrible mother because why are you saying that sort of thing, or I got terrible presents. But I just know there's actually something about her, and it's linked to some of her history and just how she is. And I chose not to make that mean that it wasn't perfect, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's really interesting about how you could be so gracious to yourself in that moment, because I think a lot of people, I think most parents would think, oh God, I that's, yeah, like you're saying, how could you say that to me, or what have I done wrong, and actually you haven't done anything wrong.
No, I haven't done anything wrong, and neither has she really. I mean, it does sound ungrateful, but she's maturing in certain ways and she hasn't quite got there. And I think one of the most important things about parenting is letting our children show us their kind of their like not so nice bits.
Yeah, that's it. It's raw, isn't it? It's just, it's unfiltered and it's coming out.
Yeah. And I hope she doesn't say that to other people, and I hope she learns in time that it's not that useful to kind of do that. But me shaming her in that moment wouldn't help. And I think that what we often don't talk about enough with perfectionism, and which Brené Brown does go on about a lot as well, is that shame is the other side of perfectionism. So we're trying to get everything perfect because actually we have this core of not feeling good enough. And having that touched is so painful. It's like devastating when I feel like I've got something wrong and I kind of go into a child place. That feeling of shame is so painful. Like it's such a visceral body experience that we just want to do everything to prevent that, you know? And so that's why we also have to be so tender with ourselves about the perfectionism, because we're trying to avoid our shameful.
Yeah. And I see that in young children, that desire to please, that desire to fit in. It's so pure and it's so lovely. And when you tap into that part of yourself, your own inner child, I find that just devastatingly just so sweet and lovely, but heartbreaking as well, that we can't, that we've learned to sort of ignore that part of ourselves and for shame to sort of take over, I suppose.
Yeah. And the reparenting that we can do for ourselves around that is so it's so special. I mean, like I'm really with you in the birthday party thing, because we're having this party on the weekend, and it's not really big enough to have it here where we live. So I've hired a village hall, but I've never seen the village hall, and I'm like having a panic attack about, what do I buy to decorate the walls? Do I have to buy a lot of whole of things? And how am I going to stick it up? And will it be okay? And what if it's all just bare walls? And will I remember to buy some balloons? And then I was sort of noticing, and what if it's just totally bare? Like, does that matter? None of the kids are going to be looking up there. I can get some balloons and it'll be fine. But I have to really soothe myself and notice all these things that I'm setting up to create something. Like, for what purpose?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Because there's actually going to be an entertainer, so the entertainer will entertain the kids, so they will probably literally not give a shit about anything on the walls. Do you know what I mean? I hope it's okay to swear on your podcast.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so,
yeah, they won't. They could not care less, and that's not what you remember from your birthday party either, is it? Yeah.
No, exactly. And I'm much more interested in actually everyone feeling like they're having a nice time, and like giving the parents like a nice cup of tea and a pastry or something, and introducing them to each other so they can have a nice time. Because I don't like going to those parties where you all stand around like a bunch of lemons watching your like children. I want people to interact,
Yeah. Do you know what I was thinking? I was really curious, I suppose, about you having twins. And I wonder how that impacts your perfectionism, because obviously as a mother, because obviously you've got two children developing at the same time, having very similar experiences and parenting. And does it make you feel a bit kinder to yourself sometimes when you realize that actually I've done this thing the same way, and they have had, they're just different people, and it's not all on me? I don't know.
No, it does. And I also really want to say it's not all on us, because it really is not all on us. There's so much stuff that we carry. I did some training with an expert in developmental trauma, and he talked about how his definition of developmental trauma was so interesting to me. He said that anything that is a minimum of 2 generations back and up till 25 is what he considers developmental trauma, which means that we are impacted by so many things that happened before we were even born. So we kind of can't take responsibility for that. And I think that's really important, because I think, especially perfectionists, we do like a lot of research on lots of things, and then it all comes back and we just dump this big mother blame on ourselves. And I think that's important. But yes, to go to your question, I absolutely, because I'm going to that bucket of blaming everything on myself and thinking it's because of me that they're like this, or blah, 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 or I'm anxious and so that's why they're anxious, or one of them is much more anxious than the other one. And I've really had to step back and notice that one of them, they are very different actually. And they bring up different things in me. So I relate differently to them because of, I think one of them makes me feel, and she doesn't make me feel, it triggers in me a feeling of I'm not somehow doing this right, because she's got more struggles in some areas. And the other one seems to be much more loving and accepting of me. And so that triggers something different in me. So it's so complex what our children trigger in us. But yes, it does help me think, like to myself, okay, Angel, like you're doing the best you can for both of them. And like we can only ever, we are all we have, if you know what I mean. So we can't kind of endlessly beat up on ourselves and think we're rubbish, because that just makes things worse for us. And even if we do need to change, but like I sometimes think I do need to shout less, or but I'm only going to do that through a portal of self-compassion. Anyway, I feel like I rambled a bit there, sorry.
No, I was just thinking, I was just taking a minute to reflect, because I think everything you've said is really important. And I was having a thought the other day about perfectionism and thinking, we talk a lot about social media being a major contributor to that sense of like, to I suppose to people's high standards, but actually I think social media maybe just amplifies that. But what you've said about that being those like childhood wounds and that internal shame, that's actually the root of that perfectionism, in the sense that it
Yes.
has existed for a long time before Instagram. And
yes.
and and I think we can kind of look at, be like, well, mothers today are too hard on themselves because they've got too many media things around them, but actually it runs, like you're saying, a lot deeper.
It runs a lot deeper.
Yeah,
it really does. And yes, social media maybe highlighted it, because we've got, if someone posts a beautiful picture of their like fabulous birthday party, and you're just like, oh God, I've got this like shitty crunchy birthday party, it's just terrible, we could beat ourselves up with that, but the reality is that all of the stuff existed before social media. And actually I think social media has helped in many ways, because we find other people and they go, oh yeah, I also have that, and then we look at ourselves and we go, oh, I'm really lovely just the way I am, actually, because I think that person over there is lovely and she's got some of the same stuff as me, so therefore I'm lovely. And then like together we can change things. Like even that we're talking about perfectionism, and that we can both like welcome in a bit more imperfection, that ripples out so much in our communities, like with your friends, your sisters, your followers, whoever,
I definitely think Yeah, I mean, social media has its drawbacks for sure, but definitely, like, if I see people who, are a bit more real and, yeah, doing things similar to me or differently to me, but they're happy, it makes me feel better and gives me a bit of a, lets me give myself a bit of a break sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially the humanness around motherhood, that it's really hard, and that like we've never talked before about how some of us might sometimes think, God, why did I do this? Or am I fit for this job? Or like, I'm a terrible mother. Or I should never have got these people. And even just normalizing, well, not even normalizing, but just saying, yeah, I sometimes feel like that too. So it takes us out of that like loop of endless self-criticism.
Yeah. 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 The what have I done? Have I ruined my life? I'm not made for this. That is such a huge wound, isn't it, to carry? But so many, well, I think almost every parent has had that moment. I'm
Yeah.
confidently, but I'm sure that they have.
I sometimes think, I mean, I don't want to say this because I can't tell people what their experience is, but I sometimes think everyone has to have had that feeling, but maybe some people just push it down really far. So they dissociate from it because it feels too threatening to acknowledge it. But I remember reading some research. I don't know where I read, I think it was Rick Hansen who said that, no, some other psychologist, I think, but basically that the research shows that parents are shown to be less happy actually, but that they have other criteria. They have a lot more meaning in their lives, and they have a lot of really rich relationships. And so those, even though the happiness dips in like the years of early parenting, they have a lot more meaning. So, and I sometimes hold on to that because there is so much meaning, and often motherhood is just such a huge growth period for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes you don't want another growth opportunity. Enough of these growth opportunities.
I've grown enough.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. Can I have a year of no growing?
Yeah, I think that's refreshing to hear. I mean, when do you think you realized you were a perfectionist or a people pleaser? When did that kind of start to fall into place for you?
Quite a long time ago. I'm 47 now, so I started doing well, I guess the reason that I am very passionate about families with this alcoholism because my father was an alcoholic, and I started going to a group like a 12-step fellowship called Al-Anon, which was for adult children and partners of alcoholics, and I realized that I think maybe I realized, yeah, but I guess in my early 20s, my late teens and early 20s. And I knew that that would be a big issue in motherhood, but I had to go back and do a whole lot more work to let go of perfectionism and control specifically. And people pleasing. I mean, I think those three go really well together, or kind of they're very linked because it all links to our own safety. All of these are adaptations that we develop in our family of origin to manage the situation we're growing up in. Because if your parents can't, for whatever reason, like see you and fully hold you emotionally, it's like so important to remain in contact with your caregiver. So we as the child shapeshift to be how we think our parents need us to be. Like they don't ever come downstairs and say, you need to get everything right. But it's kind of in those things like if you break something or if you spill something or when you make mistakes, if that can't be held but in your family, we learn we have to be really perfect. So yeah, I realized a long time ago, like probably 27 years ago or something.
Oh, it's so heartbreaking, isn't it, though? Because just thinking about little kids like this and yourself, and you just think it's a lot, isn't it, for a little person?
It is a lot for a little person, and it's always difficult. I think it's really difficult to sometimes have these conversations because there's so much nuance when we're thinking about ourselves and our own childhoods, and then when we're also trying to shift patterns in our own families. And there's such a tendency to want to get that perfect, that shifting, and to be completely different to our parents. But I think we have to have so much gentleness around that we can only do, what we can do. And I think I said this on my own podcast a couple of weeks, that I am not an alcoholic and I don't hit my children. And those are both things that happen in my family. So that might be enough, you know? And so just your listeners can think about just like one thing, because otherwise there's that tendency with the perfectionism hat on to think, right, I've got to like do all this like magic work to totally transform stuff. And that's way too much pressure for us in one generation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot of pressure, isn't it? Yeah. Especially if you've come from that kind of upbringing, and it's not, and I'm really sorry that was your experience, but it's also not super unusual either, is it? And
it's very common.
That's what I'm in, and not to invalidate that experience, but you know, how many of us are walking around with these sorts of experiences, and then
honestly, I think nearly everyone.
Yeah.
Really, I mean, dysfunction happens for alcoholism is just one of the many reasons, and it can be overwork, it can be just emotional immaturity, it can be a mother who's completely disconnected from herself. There's so many reasons that we become a perfectionist, that it's exceptionally widespread.
Yeah. And I know that before, well, like when we were talking over email, we spoke a little bit about how sleep can be a big part of that, or how it can play out around that whole area. Was that your experience? Like, what was sleep like for you and your twins?
So because I'd retrained as a psychotherapist before I had my kiddies, I knew that I wanted to be very responsive, and I knew how much it was tied to child development, and I also knew about infant development, that we had very unrealistic expectations. But because we had twins, there's also a lot of focus in the twin world about trying to get them to sleep at the same time.
Yeah.
And in trying to control things, because it feels so out of control, because you do have two of them and it really feels like a bit of a nightmare. And so I tried to be very responsive. And I think it sent me a little bit crazy, because I kind of couldn't do everything. And I also felt at some point, am I doing this wrong? Because the messages from society that you get about sleep are so, like about infant sleep, are so unrealistic from a developmental point of view, first of all. But you kind of just get this download. Like I remember the NCT group I was in, although I didn't actually do NCT, it was another group, but there was lots of people had bought a book which gave them like a routine they had to stick to. But what that meant was that they had to leave the babies to cry, because you can't just tell a baby, right, you're going down at 12 till 2. That's your slot. Yeah. Off you go. Okay, like whatever.
Good night.
Like, bye. It doesn't work. And I sort of, I didn't do that, but there was a lot of, I sort of thought, am I like a bit of a muppet? Have I missed the boat somehow? Like, what, am I doing something wrong? But we really stuck to our guns. And what happened naturally is that, because initially we just let them both sleep whenever they wanted and kind of really had two schedules going on. And then we did try and get them a bit closer together, in terms of sleeping at the same time. And they did actually naturally fall into a routine, maybe like about sort of 7 or 8 months, where they would have 3 naps a day. But sleep has always required a lot of input from us. And I think that, you know, we sleep best in safety, which means for a small baby and for children, actually, and for many of us as adults, it means having other people around so that they can co-regulate with us and calm our nervous system and just be a presence for us. And my girls are 7 now, and they have different rooms now. But so I sit outside, or my husband sits outside their room and kind of talks to them. And sometimes I'll go and lie with one of them, but then the other one needs the other parent, because it's very competitive in the twin world. Like if Mummy's next door, then they're like, the other one shouts, "What are you talking about?"
I can imagine.
So that's a bit complex. But yeah, I mean, the twin world, it was, I remember I did go to a sleep talk once, because I was like, oh, this is interesting. I'll go along. And they said things like, if they vomit, don't look them in the eye, just change their sheets and leave. And I remember actually just wanting to burst into tears, because that's promoting such abandonment of the child. But I do like I wish we need more support from mothers, because it's impossible to function when you're like completely exhausted. So I think that the structure of our society has made things like sleep training appealing, because there is an element of control, which, even though it's an illusion, um, does seem to make you feel better, because it's hard to maintain that position of connection all the time without thinking, like I sometimes still think, have I been too responsive? Like, yeah, it's really tricky.
Yeah, it is. I think it just, sleep training is just this perfect sort of response to all of these layers of, yeah, of families not having support, of the, like you said, the illusion of control, of the pressure, the financial pressures, of getting back to work and
Yeah,
not having, like, in a very practical sense, lots of people feel like they don't have a choice a lot of the time,
yeah,
that this is really, if they want to function. And then I think it just adds to this other layer, though, because of the messaging around it and the shame around a lot of the behaviors, because essentially it is sort of saying what your instinct is saying is wrong, and that feeds that internal shame and that sort of perfectionism that so many mothers then have. and it
yes.
and
And
it,
it says you can't trust yourself,
you can't
which is
trust yourself.
absolutely
Yeah.
untrue. Yeah,
Yeah, because regardless of how you feel about self-settling or whatever, or babies being on a routine or what, but like the things about not giving your baby eye contact when they're vomiting, that's such an extreme thing. And that is a thing that I think that no, like, very few, no well-adjusted or reason, like, normal person would ever want to deny their child would be eye contact when they are in a state of such distress that they're being sick. So I think, I know that sleep training means different things to different people, but at its core is this message that, like, you really don't know what you're doing, and we do, and but it's just very stressful then, because it just plays into that insecurity, and it's very profitable. Like, people make so much money, and I always say that, I picked the wrong side, because I could be very, very wealthy if I'd gone for the other
no,
side.
it's true. And I mean, I think there's a lot of stuff where you pay someone and then you leave. Actually, you go out of the house, but the reason you're going out of the house is because it's so distressing. And I think, it's like there's no like neat answer to this, because what we really need is to help people understand how problematic sleep is in terms of sleeping through. That's a fantasy. That's babies and small children. Like, there are some children who do that, but it's not that many. And that we need so much more early years support, for families, instead of spending so much money on, I don't know, whatever they're spending money on in the UK. They should be spending money on parenting support, and like physical support in the home for the mother or the father, who's ever the primary caregiver.
Yeah. I just sometimes I think, how much more hard evidence do we need that says, the years of, like, 0 to 5 are crucial for, I just feel like we all know this now, and
We
yet
know
we're
this.
still not funding, in fact, yeah, the last 20 years of seeing the Sure Starts centers defunded, closed down,
Closed.
all of
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
And whenever, just, I hear all the time when I listen to podcasts, radio, read articles about all these experts saying, actually, 0 to 5, we really need to get onto this. And then just in practice, it's not happening, is it, at all?
No, it seems to take a long time for like research to filter down to actual policy change.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel quite cynical, because like, when we are disconnected from ourselves, and when we learn to kind of minimize and shut down, we make amazing workers. So sometimes I feel like it works for capitalism to do this
Yeah.
type of thing in childhood, because we just become overworkers who are constantly trying to get everything perfect, basically.
Yeah, definitely.
If we don't connect to our children.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, these messages around unrealistic expectations of infant behavior, particularly around sleep, is that even if you choose not to sleep train, you still then end up carrying a lot of that shame and perfectionism, even though, like you were saying, like, then you worry, I'm being too responsive, or have I made a rod for my own back, or I'm we were just talking before we started recording about feeding to sleep, for example, and like, okay, I've made this decision, but there's this thing in the back of my mind that this is terrible. And so it really filters through, doesn't it? So
Yeah,
to the whole cultural kind of expectation of motherhood.
it really does. And yeah, I mean, in the last, I can't remember if it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I had two clients in the same week, so both with newborn babies, say to me, they literally said to me, and their posture changed as well when they said it. They said to me, oh yeah, I'm feeding to sleep. And then they both dropped their head like that and said, but I know that I shouldn't do that. And I watched their posture and I could actually see the shame come over them, because shame is quite a collapsed position in our bodies. We kind of round our shoulders and drop our heads. And I said to both, we kind of explored with both of them about, if you want to feed to sleep, that's absolutely your prerogative. Like, go ahead. And do you want to, like, does this align with your values? And for both of them, they absolutely wanted to do that. But somehow they thought that I might have something to say about that. And they said that their health visitors had said, so they were in the UK, that was like not a good idea. And so I was so happy to see your post last week, talking about that and talking about all the chemicals that get released to make it both people more sleepy, because that's so shame busting, that sort of information that you share. And so, people can do this or they cannot do this, but we need information to help people understand that it's like a wonderful choice for both of them, actually. I really love that post.
Thank you. Yeah. And whenever I talk about feeding to sleep, I'm always shocked. I shouldn't be shocked, but how by the shame that comes up, and how many people are saying, like, God, thank you. I didn't know. I thought this was, I didn't know there were actually any benefits to this. I thought this was just like I was being weak. I was being lazy.
Yeah.
I was like, choosing the easier option, and like, I know I'm making a problem for myself. And it really blows my mind, because I think that's so, I've had that feeling as well. And like, it really robs you of what could be a really joyful, pure moment, whether you're breastfeeding or bottle feeding or whatever, of just seeing your baby get a bit milk drunk and sleepy and settle in your arms. What a lovely moment, that can be. It's not always that blissful, obviously. So, I've also had some stressful feed to sleep moments, or epic hour-long, 2-hour-long sessions, but there can be really nice. And it's really crazy that message. And I was talking to someone yesterday about, like, where has that come from? Like, how did it get so ingrained in us that was a bad thing? Because you could go to another culture and it's just like totally normal, and no one would ever think that was a problem.
No, exactly. I agree with you. And it absolutely breaks my heart. I actually feel like I'm getting tears in my eyes thinking about all of us dear mums thinking, like, I'm bad, or I'm weak, or I'm taking the easy way out, because it's absolutely such a beautiful experience. And it's so like, there are so many hard moments in motherhood, like so much pain, actually. So these beautiful connecting moments when there's all these lovely hormones floating around and everyone's, feeling connected, like, we really should actually magnify those instead of denigrating them and saying you're being weak.
Yeah, totally. Because feeding can be really difficult. I think even like bottle feeding, breastfeeding, most people have some form of feeding challenge, or it can be really stressful to establish, figure out what works for your baby, what works for you. So yeah, when we get these moments of joy, to then not even be allowing ourselves, those
them.
That's so messed up.
Yeah, it's true. It is so messed up. And I think that I always am interested in the kind of societal piece around this. And I'm sure that there's something around pushing formula, and which is very necessary in many cases, but pushing, so like, because it's much easier to control that's got much more money in it as a business than like the magic of breast milk. I mean, I wasn't actually able to breastfeed, so I know we talked about that too, actually, but I think that, it's so, we have to really kind of take back our individual power within our families and do what works for us, really unapologetically and bravely, and celebrate ourselves for that, whatever that is.
But that's the thing, like, and what I tried to do in that post was highlight that there are like other influences at play. There are people that do profit, and all this capitalism does also function better if we can stay in this state of shame, or we can sort of tell women they're not doing it right. Like there are these much bigger systems there reinforcing that message. When Aptamil has an advert on television for its milk, and it shows the dad doing the night feed, that's very much like a intent, like they've done that very specifically to show, you know, and that not that I'm against dads doing night feed. I think that's wonderful, but you know, it just shows that it just taps into all of those fears of like why breastfeeding would be wrong, and why that would be a shameful thing for some people. And then it puts so much pressure, you know, there's so much pressure on. I don't think pressure, I think there are some women do experience a lot of like, well, you are going to breastfeed, you will breastfeed. There's all this information about how important it is, how amazing it is. And, you know, and certainly when I had my son, there was every midwife was like, oh, you are going to try, aren't you? And then there's no support. So again, it's another system that lets you down, because, you know, they sell it to you as this great thing. And then if it's not working out, who do I go to? Oh, absolutely no one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we take on board more shame because the problem gets pushed into us and individualized. Meanwhile, we need much more. We need like what is that?
IBCLCs.
More widely available. And I mean, because I think that both my sisters could really breastfeed amazingly, but one of them particularly did a lot of hard work to learn, with like lots of bleeding nipples for weeks and terrible things, but eventually kind of worked. And so many people dedicate so much energy and time to it. And it's another thing that sort of says it's supposed to be easy, and actually it's not. It's like a big learned thing for both the baby and the mom.
Yeah,
it's really complex.
I suppose so much of stuff around motherhood though is this idea of like natural being innate and effortless. Yes. So whether that's breathing your baby out in a water birth surrounded by candles, and just, you know, that sort of myth, or not that's a myth, obviously some people have births like that, but that's the sort of gold standard I think for a lot of women. Or, you know, the not having any fertility issues, you know, that, you know, there's shame around infertility, there's shame around how you give birth, there's shame around how you feed your baby, all of those things. And these ideas that these are all natural things, and therefore, if they aren't coming naturally to you, if you're a perfectionist, that's just like, well, that's catastrophic, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And there's all those opportunities to beat up on ourselves because and isn't it interesting, because you've listed all those different areas, and as perfectionists, it's not like we take our own standards and go, you know, what I've chosen is good enough. We take these like external, magical, made up things to kind of hold ourselves up against, and then just beat ourselves up relentlessly. And it's so powerful to have sort of conversation like this, because then together we can stand up and go like, no, like, get away perfectionism, get away capitalism standards or whatever. Like, we're not going to do that.
Yeah, because I'm now in the sort of like the healthcare system again with my second pregnancy. I'm finding it really different, but then I noticed some old like habits creeping in of people pleasing and saying yes, and I'm trying this time to advocate for myself a bit better, just in the sense of just asking more questions, not necessarily being difficult for the sake of it, but just asking questions, figuring out if that's the right thing for me, something I would have never done with my first pregnancy. But it's so uncomfortable. I absolutely can't bear it. I just want to come into an appointment and be a good girl and go away.
Yeah.
And think, oh, wasn't she easy? And
yeah, I totally understand. Difficult.
Yeah, so it's just like,
that's so brilliant. I love hearing that, because you know what the thing is if we can just tolerate some of our own discomfort, and soothe ourselves and be present with ourselves in it, we can bring about so much change, because it's our own body, it's our own sensations often, it is our own sensations that scream out to us like, this is not safe. But actually you are safe. No midwife or no one, I mean, someone might shout at you, God forbid, I hope they don't, but you know, you can shout right back. if they do.
And do you know what? It's been fine. And actually, I've had some brilliant conversations with people, and it's not been half as awkward or uncomfortable as I thought it would be. And some really, positive things have come from it. But it feels so uncomfortable, and I hate it.
Yeah, but that's so empowering. I mean, I bet like some of the people listening to this will be really taking that on board and thinking, I can do that too. It's brilliant.
I guess it's just knowing, isn't it, that other people like might be doing things, but it's still hard. Like, that you can push yourself out of that comfort zone. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. Like, because something feels difficult doesn't mean you're doing it wrong, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, because for like people pleasers, one of the most, like, when push comes to shove and we're actually at that choice point where we change behavior, our own body will be giving us so many messages of don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, just please, just be easy, don't be the difficult one. And we even label us. You said, I don't want to be a difficult person. And I'm like, bring it on, be the difficult one. Do you know what I mean?
It's my body.
Exactly. It's your body, it's your baby. And if we can just be with ourselves enough, tolerate that discomfort. And I often sweat, if I'm getting flustered or I sweat on my nose, then I'm like, oh God, they can see that I'm flustered and everything. And we sort of just have to kind of get through that, be with our humanity, and then we've done it. And then we get so good at practicing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. And I think these things just, motherhood and everything, it just brings up such deep stuff. So sometimes I've had appointments where I've suddenly had this urge to cry and I have no idea what I would even be crying about. Isn't it amazing how, your body can just bring up these experiences and sort of try to, well, I guess your body isn't trying to shut you down, but I take that as a sign to stop being difficult. Like, it's too much, you're getting overwhelmed. And I guess going back to like our children and how overwhelmed they get and how that pattern might have been to shut away from those big feelings, how that's then coming up. It's really, it's intense.
Yeah. And those moments are probably actually when you need the most support and to let the tears come.
Yeah. Yeah. I always think it's really interesting as well, talking to people who've grown up in different cultures as well, because I blame a lot of this on Britishness, but obviously you didn't grow up here in the UK, so.
Oh yeah, but I grew up in South Africa and there's a lot of Britishness.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah.
I went to a boarding school, which is very British as well. So.
You've inherited the very worst.
I think this is Western culture, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of, and it's all guided by Britain, because if you think of colonialism and the history, it's kind of Britain, Australia, Canada, the US, lots of.
Yeah, and actually, I lived in Australia for a few years as a child and went to a very, very British influenced school there. And I would say that was my most British experience of my whole childhood.
Exactly, because in South Africa, we were like a colonial outpost. So I think that people pride themselves on Britishness, if you know what I mean. So the schools are kind of striving for that in a way, which is, so they're striving for disconnection really in some way.
Yeah. Gosh, we've got a lot to answer for, the UK. A lot to answer for. It's
we could go down a rabbit hole.
I know that's a whole other episode, isn't it? Let's not go there. I don't. A lot of the sleep stuff, I think, was coming back to perfectionism, is this idea of how much so many of us would love just to go into that baby group on a Wednesday morning and just say, my baby slept through the night last night, and hoping that other people will think, wow, you must have it together. That's amazing. Tell me your secrets, I guess. Is that a big part of it?
I think that is a big part of it, because then we get reflected back to us, you're okay.
Yeah.
And the reality is we are all okay. We are all wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful, treasured beings. But we've relied so much on that external validation. We've learned we have to be a certain way. So we have to be getting things perfect, getting things right, achieving, pleasing others, not being emotionally messy. We've learned all of those things. So motherhood challenges all of that. It's like completely out of control. It's emotionally messy. Even if you've repressed your feelings really well your whole life, it's almost impossible not to have your feelings burst into technicolor in motherhood,
That's so true.
And so then going into that baby group feels like, if those other moms just think I'm like a good enough mom, then maybe my shame core is not actually true and I am good enough. But the real work is actually undoing our shame core and learning that we are good enough, and that we're good enough regardless of whether our baby sleeps through or does not sleep through, or does not eat or does eat. I mean, what you said about sleeping, I'm sorry, about eating as well. We had so many eating challenges, and it is so difficult not to make it up like somehow I'm failing, but we're not failing. We're not failing, and soothing ourselves and being kind to ourselves, and finding people who kind of honor our experience and let us be our real selves. So important, because going to those mom groups where everyone's like says their baby sleeps through, then I don't know, I just was like, oh man, I'm definitely not, I don't belong here, because I'm getting something really wrong here then.
Yeah. You've used the term good enough a lot there. And I remember hearing a bit about how you just have to be good enough as a mother. And obviously that's a key message, right? But I also remember a few years ago feeling like good enough, that isn't enough. I want to be great, like, isn't like good enough sounds a bit rubbish almost. And I want to be brilliant, actually. I don't want to be good enough. I want to be spectacular at this. I want to be the best. And I think that's difficult, isn't it? Understanding that good enough is actually the best, is actually, yeah.
I totally agree with you. I also used to think good enough, like, what the hell is that? I don't want to be good enough.
Who wants the good enough option?
Yes, it sounds like really crap. But it is like, because the thing is part of actually guiding our children is teaching them that all relationships have ruptures. And so noticing that we have ruptures, not going away from that, not sweeping it under the carpet, like owning our part in things, apologizing to them. It's so reparative. It's so, like, I'm sure if you have with your son, if you apologize to him and you kind of say, oh, I was grumpy or I was cross, their little faces soften and you can see how much they feel seen. And that connection is so, like, that reconnection after rupture is so profound. And so that helps build resilience. So I think that if we are too busy being spectacular, first of all, we're disconnected a lot of the time because we're so busy focused on our performance. And then that teaches our children that they are only okay when they're being spectacular. But I agree with you. It's a hard thing to hold. It's hard to, I find it like when I've had moments of disconnection with my kids, or when I realized the impact of something I did on one of them or something, it feels really hard to soothe myself through that sometimes.
Yeah.
And I think that's a practice and a process.
Yeah. That's an important thing to remember, isn't it? That it's part of the work, I guess, that we do. And yeah, but that's so lovely it's always so reassuring when I'm reminded that actually messing up and then repairing that rupture with my child is actually beneficial for us, but for us both, really, and that it is sort of releasing them from the bonds of perfectionism, and that mum or dad or whoever, they are imperfect as well, and I can be imperfect and still seen and loved and valued, and that is like, what an amazing gift you could give to a child.
Yeah, exactly.
Just because you were tired and cranky and snapped because of something, it's life.
It's the absolute antidote to perfectionism, because what we learned was you're not okay when you're not getting things perfect, and it's just that exhausting burden. It's so much self-attack and self-abandonment. So, like, I always think the most beautiful message is if we can teach our child that all of them and all their parts are welcome. And we do that by modeling that we are all our parts and all of us is welcome. I mean, and that again is, and it sounds very simple when I say it like that. It's kind of messy work in the trenches of one's own family.
Yeah, but you're right, because saying to a child, it's okay, you can be angry, you can have big feelings, and then not doing that for yourself, that's not going to mean anything. Like, you're just reading a script from whatever, and I'm sure that's fine. But yeah, it's the other side of the work, isn't it? That of reparenting ourselves and modeling it. Oh God, it's so hard, isn't it?
It is hard.
Yeah,
it is.
yeah. But thank you so much for this, because there's just been so much to think about and reflect on. And I think wherever anyone is at this stage, we're listening to this right now, I'm sure there'll be things here that they relate to, that this is sort of like you're saying, an ongoing process at different stages of your parenthood experience, isn't it? It's just different things come up at different times. And
and trust, starting to really trust ourselves. and knowing that we'll have mistakes, but that's okay.
Thank you so much.
Great pleasure.
And so if anyone wants to know more about you and your work, I'll put various links to your website and everything in our show notes. And obviously people can find you on Instagram as well. So I'll include all the links to that.
Thank you. Yes, I changed my handle to my name recently.
You did. I love that.
Counihan.
I love that. I think that I thought that's a great perfection, like as in like not hiding yourself and being like, here I am, this is who I am. I'm not hiding behind a name
With my surname that no one can pronounce, but yes.
Yeah. But here I am, and I love it. I think that's great. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me, Hannah. It's been very joyful. We've laughed a lot. It really has been very joyful. So thank you. And resourcing for me as well.